Round 1. Let the action begin. Go!
Sega must have been really wanting to take the fight to Capcom to usurp them as a premier versus fighting game developer. With the success of Virtua Fighter in the arcades, Sega quickly got to work on making other polygonal fighters. Fighting Vipers uses the same game engine as AM2's Virtua Fighter 2, but features enclosed arenas and an armour mechanic, and was targeted more towards Western audiences, using a US setting and more free-form styles of martial arts. Fighting Vipers features a similar style of gameplay to Sega's AM2 more renowned Virtua Fighter series, specifically Virtua Fighter 2, using simply guard, punch and kick attack buttons with a focus on combo moves. Each of the 9 characters featured in the game wears armour that can be broken off by opponents, leaving them more vulnerable to taking damage. A human-shaped meter in the top corner of the screen monitors damage to the armour. Walls surround each arena, caging the combatants in, allowing for attacks in conjunction with them bouncing off walls, etc. In Fighting Vipers, there are no ring-outs. Producer Yu Suzuki stated, "We received comments about the ring-outs in Virtua Fighter, indicating different changes, and so far, for Fighting Vipers, the fighting can continue mercilessly." If a knockout attack is strong enough, characters can knock their opponent over, on top, or straight through the walls. I had always found Fighting Vipers to be more of an experimental game. I always felt that Sega were trying new ideas for Virtua Fighter, but did not want to implement them without testing the waters first. So if the new ideas and concepts were a flop, it would not ruin Virtua Fighter's great reputation. That is my take on it anyway. At this point in the generational technology of the arcades, it seems pretty pointless talking about the visuals. Polygonal fighters were always great looking in the arcades, and since almost all of them now use texture mapping, they were moving into this more natural looking standard. What I mean to say is the hard lines and rectangular shapes seen in the original Virtua Fighter were now consigned to the history books. The background still looked a little bland, with Sega favouring keeping the detail focused on the in-ring action. That's not to say they were bad, they just didn't grab your attention, that's all. Apart from the airplane taking off in this stage, there was nothing worthy of note really. Music and sound effects in games were now, at this stage, where nothing really sounded computer generated. CD quality soundtracks were the norm. Sampled speech and sound effects were the standard in most modern arcade hardware now. So opinions on sound come down to if the music was a good fit for the game, or if you preferred rock to techno. And for someone who always favoured sound over graphics in games, this generation of technology had reached the pinnacle of this, and it was a brilliant time to be an avid visitor of amusement arcades, even though they were now in the decline. The gameplay on Fighting Vipers was too similar to Virtua Fighter for my liking. The new cage system prevented the ring-outs, but experienced and competent Virtua Fighter gamers hadn't relied on ring-outs to win a match for a long time. So what was the point of it exactly? The body armour thing was slightly interesting. It allowed the player to focus on a certain area to inflict maximum damage, but again, this wasn't enough to encourage interest in the game in my opinion. These changes didn't make Fighting Vipers a better game than Virtua Fighter, it just made it a different game. And personally, I never thought it was better than Virtua Fighter anyway. I never really thought the game done enough to stand out or improve upon Virtua Fighter. And maybe that comparison is a little unfair, as it is a different game. But everything about it just seemed so ordinary and now routine. In the arcades anyway. But then, I wasn't really into this kind of fighter as much as I was into the likes of Street Fighter 2 and Samurai Showdown. I still favoured the 2D sprite fighters. But my disdain for these kind of fighters might also be because I wasn't very good at them. The move from sprite to polygon was not an easy transition for me. A bit like some games really. The game did seem to prove popular enough, especially in Japan, so much so that a sequel was released a short while later, and Fighting Vipers even got a port on the Sega Saturn in 1996, which was pretty close to the arcade version.
Fighting Viper. Round 1. Let the action begin. Go!
The Saturn conversion, like the arcade original, was developed by Sega AM2. Work on the conversion began in the first quarter of 1996 and took approximately 8 months. After converting the Virtua Fighter 2 engine, the team focused first on recreating the barriers, as they anticipated this would be the most difficult part to accomplish on the Saturn hardware. Because armour and walls can be broken in the game, there was no easy way of reducing the number of polygons in those elements. In part to compensate for the lower polygon counts on the characters, a new form of dynamic lighting incorporating Gurad shading was added to the Saturn version. In order to make this effect possible and have the game run at a speed comparable to the arcade version, the team decided at the beginning of development that they would not use the Saturn's high resolution mode. The Saturn port of Fighting Vipers added playback mode and training mode, both of which are now used widely in the fighting genre. Players could save their matches and play them again in playback mode, while training mode talked the player through the moves of each character one by one. As much as I am not a big fan of the game, I give credit where it is due, and this port of Fighting Vipers is simply excellent. And again, apologies here for the interlacing issues you see. I was having major issues with the emulation of this port, but it doesn't have a bearing on my opinion of the game. One of the things that is worthy of a mention here is the intro. Before intros used in-game engines, the majority of games use these computer animated intros, and they have not aged well. Well, some age better than others, but this style of visual definitely lets you know this is a 1990s CD based game. The in-game visuals are pretty good, and at home on a CRT it did look and feel just like the arcade game, which again was a very common theme in the mid-90s with the PlayStation and Saturn, and again there is little point in talking about the sound because, well, progress and all that.
Round 2. Go!
Where this game excels is in the different play modes. The training mode is such a welcome addition, especially for those like myself who are rubbish at this kind of fighter. Unfortunately, I do not have the patience to go through that mode now. I am an old grouch, but back then, my mate had this for his Saturn, and I do remember using it quite a bit. In fact, when we had a versus session, we had become quite good at this game, for the 15 to 20 minutes we played it at times. Where the arcade version felt like an experiment, the home port felt for sure that Sega were wanting to provide much needed value for money, with the inclusion of the game modes and the playback mode, giving more for the player to do other than just fight the CPU or a mate. It was a more polished effort than Virtua Fighter on the Saturn, and just showed what Sega could do when they were not rushed into meeting tight deadlines. And the Saturn port was universally praised in game magazines everywhere. In fact, in the UK, one reviewer even stated it was a reason to buy a Saturn. A very bold claim indeed, which I do not agree with. Fighting Vipers is one of those games that was rated and hyped by gamers everywhere, but is another game I just didn't rate. It's not a bad game, it just wasn't a game I favoured, that's all. But that was my look back at Fighting Vipers. If you like this video, please do give me a sub and a thumbs up, or maybe even a comment or two below about your memories of Fighting Vipers on any format. And a massive thank you to all of those who have subscribed and commented on my channel. Your feedback and support really does go a long way in helping the channel grow, and I do appreciate all of your support, so thank you from me. And that's all from me, folks. Thanks for watching.
Get out of the rack!